right, continuing on with the TMCC Library Open Genealogy Lab Outstanding Guest Speaker Series, today we are pleased to welcome back Jonathan J. Dickey. Jay's talk today is entitled Researching Your Witch Ancestors. Jay will briefly cover some of the history of witchcraft trials in Europe and early America. The main focus of his talk, however, will be on the research resources available in various collections to trace your witch ancestors, including various free or subscription-based online resources. He'll also discuss several lineage societies for proven descendants of accused American witches. Jay himself has several ancestors who were accused or otherwise involved in witch trials in New England in the 1600s, including the Salem witch trials, so he has a particular interest in the subject matter. In August, Jay hosted a Zoom presentation by the Director of Education of the Salem Witch Museum, Rachel Christone, who provided an in-depth review of the history of the Salem witch trials. Included in Jay's presentation is a list of key books recommended by the Witch Museum for those of you who want to read further about the history of the trials. A digital copy of Jay's slide presentation will be available to you following his talk, along with digital copies of several recommended reading lists. So without further ado, I'd like to offer a warm virtual welcome to Jay.
Well, thank you, Suzanne. It's a pleasure to be back speaking to the TMCC Genealogy Lab, and thank you all for participating this morning. I want to say a word first about American Heritage Partners. We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We're dedicated to sponsoring educational programs such as this one, or participating in them, on a wide array of early American and later American historical topics. As Suzanne said, we, for example, featured the Director of Education from the Salem Witch Museum. Most recently, I gave a talk to TMCC Genealogy Lab about the history and genealogy of Quakerism in America. And we have great plans for 2024 in terms of additional educational programs. If you're interested in more information, please go to our website, AmericanHeritagePartners.org, or at the end of this slide deck, you'll see my email address. And as Suzanne said, she'll be providing a copy of this slide deck soon. And so please feel free to contact me for more information or for questions. So to the topic of researching your witch ancestors, I guess I would say we are, it's Friday the 13th. I also would use the tired phrase, we are in the season of the witch. Halloween is just a few weeks away, and we all enjoy the festive nature, perhaps, of Halloween and the ghosts and goblins and the outfits and the trick-or-treating and all that. But I'm here to say that the witch trials, and in particular the Salem witch trials, are really a shockingly awful moment in American history. As the title of our program a few weeks ago suggests, it was truly a story of injustice in early America. And I'm not going to get into the history today so much, but I feel passionate about this subject because it was such a watershed moment in our American history and still resonates today. I want to share that at the 300th anniversary of the Salem witch trials, which was in 1992, they did a memorial in Salem. You can go to it today, the Salem Witch Trials Memorial, which is dedicated to the 20 victims, I'll call them, of the witch trials. It's really an impressive and sobering memorial. And on the occasion of the commemoration, Nobel Prize winner Elie Wiesel came to deliver a speech. Nobel Prize winner and Holocaust survivor. And it was you can see it online. It was an amazing and moving talk, but he captured the gist of it in saying, and I quote, "Today, too, there are Salems." We talk about witch trials. The Salem witch trials were the epitome of that. And so For those of you who are in the midst of researching your witch ancestors or want to learn more about it, we've provided a reading list in the email that Suzanne sent around this morning, a recommended reading list. There's a prodigious amount of writing and researching and historiography that's been done, but I commend to you the reading list that was circulated, and I've excerpted some of it in one of the slides you'll see later in this talk. And I would also say we're past the 300-year mark, and we are still, as a society, in the process of pardoning and exonerating many of the victims of the witch trials, particularly those in New England, and I'll touch upon that as we proceed into the talk. So let me start by saying this isn't just about Salem. Accusations of witchcraft, of course, were prevalent throughout the world, particularly in Europe and early America. You'll see here at least one shocking statistic. Of course, there were laws on the books in England and Scotland and Ireland and elsewhere starting in the mid-1500s. The one statistic from Scotland says it all, 2,500 people over the years 1563 to 1736, 2,500 people were executed for witchcraft just in one country, in Scotland. It was prevalent, it was ongoing when America was first founded. It was prevalent as our colonies were growing, and certainly the witch trials of 1692, there was a long history preceding them of injustice and lawlessness throughout the world. In the colonies, it was not just Massachusetts. Most of the colonies in the young United States engaged in accusations of witchcraft and trials and executions. Most prominent Massachusetts, of course, Connecticut, New Hampshire, but there were at least 6 other colonies for which we have pretty well documented history of accusations, trials, and executions of witches, and the resources I'll be talking about will point you in the right direction to some of those witch proceedings in all of these colonies. Examples of the earliest of the witch accusations and trials in early America, you'll see here, really started in 1647, not too far after the country was first founded. We waded into the witch hysteria, 1647 being the first example of a trial and execution of a alleged witch, Alice Young. And I mentioned at the outset that we're still in the process of pardoning and exonerating these victims. Well, Alice Young, executed in 1647. It took a while, but the town of Windsor, Connecticut, finally exonerated her in 2017. That's not the only example of history waiting for justice to be done. Massachusetts, the first execution in the following year, 1648, and you'll see on down to Mary Parsons of Springfield, Massachusetts in 1651, one of my several witch ancestors. She was not executed, but she was convicted in Boston of witchcraft. She was from Springfield, Massachusetts. Note that in all of these examples, they are women. And that remained true for the many, many decades that followed of witch trials and accusations. The vast majority of the accused were women, and they were women very often, I'll say, at the margins of society. They were poor, they were perhaps today, looking back, suffered from mental disorders, they were not able to integrate into society, and it was easy to somehow assume that this crazy person was a witch. And so there were many, many examples of that, including in the Salem witch trials, of those kinds of marginal women becoming the victims of accusations of witchcraft. I do want to emphasize here that as you see the different locations, Rhode Island, Connecticut, what have you, when you're doing your research, an easy way to start to zero in on whether you have a witch ancestor is to look first at the time period. One might say 1692. Well, as I have suggested, it goes much further back in time. It goes much further forward in time, but also focus on the location. Take my example of Windsor, Connecticut. Did you have an ancestor who lived in the period of 1647 in or around Windsor, Connecticut? Very much a possibility that ancestor was somehow connected with the witch trials that were taking place in Connecticut. There were many of them, by the way. Connecticut was not far behind Massachusetts in the number of accused witches and witch trials. So, keep your eye open for time period and location. And also keep an eye out for not just those who were the accused, much less the ones who were tried and convicted, but the accusers, the witnesses. Countless people were involved in these witch trials as witnesses. That took the form of either written or oral testimony, affidavits submitted for which there are records, which I'll talk about in a minute. So all kinds of witnesses from all social demographics, all kinds of accusers for that matter. Judges, of course, the Salem witch trials are an example of that. There were judges in these cases. And one of the things that Elie Wiesel, the Holocaust survivor, noted in his speech in 1992 was, from the perspective of the times, all of these convictions and executions were perfectly legal. They followed the legal processes of the time, and they had judges and they had jurors, not so much the lawyers, but as far as they were concerned, these were legal proceedings. One judge who was infamous from the Salem witch trials was Samuel Sewall. He kept prodigious diaries and journals of his activities. He was the Chief Justice of Massachusetts' highest court. He presided over most of the Salem witch trials. Harvard graduate. Justice was not done, nevertheless. And years later, in 1696, everything pretty much stopped in 1692 in the Salem witch trial. 1696, he very openly and publicly apologized for what he did as the presiding judge at the Salem witch trials. Clergy, members of the clergy, most notably figures like Cotton Mather, very much involved in the hysteria, not so much in the trials, but in the whipping up of the hysteria over the devil and over the witches and over the goblins and all of that, fueled by sermons from the pulpit. Cotton Mather, in August of 1692, in one of his letters, which is of record and can be found on some of the sources I'm going to point you to, quote, "Oh, good God is working miracles. 5 witches were lately executed." That was his perspective. This is a great thing. We're executing witches. God commands it. Samuel Parris was a minister in Salem, very much active in the time of the witch trials. February 1692, he said, "Christ knows how many devils there are in his churches." He was an activist judge, pushing for the prosecution and execution of witches in his town. This painting, by the way, that you see here, pretty famous painting. And I think it very nicely depicts the utter chaos of these trials. Hysterical accusers, judges who were completely biased, glaring down at the accused, not letting them defend themselves. A wonderful painting. It's in the Peabody Museum at Yale University. So a quick overview of at least the most prominent of the witch trials, and then we'll dive into the research materials to help you do your research. Over 200 people were accused of witchcraft just in Salem, 200 people. Thankfully, only a fraction of those accused were actually executed, 20 executed to be precise, 24 that were either executed, pressed to death, in one case, or died in prison. There were 7 men. Again, women were the most prominent, 17 women versus 7 men, 14 women hanged by the neck until dead. 3 of them died in prison. Much later, after the hysteria abated in the fall of 1692, those who had not been executed were generally either pardoned or released. One ironic example was Tituba. She's the one who kicked it all off, first to be accused of witchcraft by young girls in Salem, first to confess to witchcraft. She then thereafter spent the rest of her time in prison, never executed, but ultimately they didn't know what to do with her because the tradition was that when you were jailed, you had to pay your own way for your food and clothing and shelter. And she ran up such a bill that they would insist that you pay your bill before you were released from prison. Well, she couldn't do it, so they sold her into slavery. So that's what happened to Tituba in 1692. She was sold into slavery. She was the person who basically started it all. And I mentioned pardons and exonerations. You'll be shocked to see here that it was as late as May of this year that one of the victims was finally exonerated posthumously. That was in May of this year, a Massachusetts victim from May of 1692. All right. I emphasize at the bottom here, hundreds and hundreds of people were participants besides the accused. I want to give you one example. And this is where your research can really take you to interesting places and potentially trace you to the witch trials themselves. One of my witch ancestors was Mary Bradbury, Mary Perkins Bradbury. She was married to Thomas Bradbury. They were 2 of the most prominent people in Salisbury, which was just a little bit north of Salem. He was actually one of the town leaders, and she was a very respected member of the community. Well, she was accused of witchcraft. These witch trials in Salem, by the way, were not just Salem people. It involved people from all over Essex County, Salisbury being one example, Exeter, Andover. They were dragged into court in Salem, and that was the case with Mary. And you'll see here in this photo I took a petition in her behalf and in support of her innocence was submitted by dozens and dozens and dozens of townspeople. You'll see this list. This was page 1 of 2. There were 100 plus people who signed this petition in her favor, all of them potential ancestors, all of them, I would put them into the category of participants in the Salem witch trials because they stepped forward. They spoke up. They said, this woman is innocent. Well, she was convicted nonetheless. A number of these actually gave testimony in the form of affidavits or came down from Salisbury to attend her trial, all for naught. But it wasn't all a one-sided affair. There were many people in these witch trials who spoke up and tried to stop the hysteria from going to the extremes of trial and execution. Speaking of documentation in the Salem witch trials as one example, having just hosted the director of education from the Salem Witch Museum, she pointed me to what they call their descendants packets, which are available to you, at least for a selected number of individuals who were involved. In those witch trials. They've been very carefully and exhaustively researched. I know that because this one you see as an example is, again, my ancestor, Mary Bradbury. I bought her descendants packet. I compared it to what I know about her, and I've done a lot of research on her. They are excellent, excellent, excellent treatments of these individuals. It's a biography. It has all the citations to documentation, a lot of information about not just them, but also their descendants. So I could look at my descendant packet for Mary Bradbury and see several generations on down her genealogy, not obviously down to me, but very helpful in documenting and further documenting, my line to Mary Bradbury. So on their website, you can click on their descendants packets page, and you'll see who they've done these for. The historian who wrote these is one of the most respected historians in the world of witch trials, not just Salem. And so it's really, I commend it to you if you are so fortunate to have one of those individuals go out and buy the descendant packet for that person. Here's a few other specific sources that likewise have extremely detailed information about not just the Salem witch trials, but more broadly, accusations beyond the Salem witch trials. You'll get this slide deck at the end of my presentation. Look at the links, particularly to the University of Virginia's Salem Witch Trials Documentary Archive and Transcripts Project. It is a phenomenal, prodigious effort that they've undertaken to house in one place just about everything you would want to know about the people involved, their participation, what became of them, the transcripts of the trials, which are fascinating reading, morbidly fascinating reading. Probably one of the best sites that I found in my own research to go to. I really can't overemphasize University of Virginia's project. Here's an example of what they have. Of course, this is not transcribed, but in the case of my ancestor, Mary Bradbury, they have an entire file on her court proceeding, everything from the original plea, the original indictment to her plea, which you see here, and you can see the transcription there, down through the witness testimony and the ultimate, her ultimate conviction for witchcraft. I guess I should stop and say she was one of the very few who was convicted but never executed. And the story of how she managed to escape the prison, it is still not known today how she escaped. There's a lot of speculation that perhaps her husband, who, as I mentioned, was a very prominent member of the town of Salisbury, may have pulled a lot of strings with a lot of people, and maybe money changed hands to get her sprung, so to speak. But she did escape. She did disappear. She surfaced after the witch hysteria ended, and she lived a long life into her 80s. But this is an example of the University of Virginia archive records, all digitized, all online. You can look up your witch and get the entire soup to nuts court records of that person's trial. One of the great, let me turn to lineage societies, one of the other great sources is the website of the Associated Daughters of Early American Witches. It is a lineage society, only open to women, and has, compared to what you see referenced at the very bottom, Son of a Witch, which is another lineage society, it has actually done quite a bit of work to put out online a gigantic amount of information, resources, research materials about American witches. And when I say American witches, it is not just Salem, it is not just Massachusetts, it's every possible witch they were able to document. One of the handouts that was circulated to you this morning is in fact from their website. It is a 10 to 12 page single-spaced listing, alphabetical listing of all the known witches, accused witches, their husbands, information about dates and places, who was in Connecticut, who was elsewhere, who were their husbands. Not all of them necessarily women on the list, but the organization is limited to women. I mentioned Connecticut earlier in this talk. They have a tremendous collection related to the Connecticut witch accusations and trials. Very long and detailed guides to Connecticut resources for your possible Connecticut witch connections. You'll see the website listed there, www.adeaw.us. I really recommend this site to you. The image you see here, by the way, when you go to that website, it doesn't look like this. It looks incredibly dark. It's incredibly scary, actually. So what I've managed to extract here and kind of change the coloration on it is not what you'll see when you go to the website, but have fun with this one. They've done a great job. Son of a Witch, not so much. I've not joined Son of a Witch. I have friends who have. They do have a Facebook page. There's nothing on it. It is limited to men. And so that's as much as I can tell you about Son of a Witch. It like ADEAW, will have its own list of qualifying ancestors and so forth. I suspect that it's no better or longer than what the Associated Daughters has already done and published. But if you are a male watching this and you believe you have a witch ancestor, consider joining Son of a Witch. It's out there. I think there may be 200 or 300 members of Son of a Witch. Some other specific sources. One that's pretty old but still highly regarded. American Ancestors think so because they recently republished it, is Samuel Drake's 1869 Annals of Witchcraft in New England. I have a copy here in my office. It's interesting reading. They're very short, pithy summaries year by year of what went on in New England, also in Virginia and South Carolina and other venues, and naming names. It's not limited to the accused. It will talk about other participants in the witch accusations and witch trials during this very long time period that the book covers. And so that's available online for free at archives.org, or you can buy the book from American Ancestors. That's what I did. But either way, it's interesting and helpful reading. Otten's book, The Witch Hunt of 1692, highly regarded. It's on the Salem Witch Museum's list of excellent books to research both the history and the genealogy of the witch trials. Another website, The Witches of Massachusetts Bay, has great links to a lot of genealogical materials. So Witches of Massachusetts Bay is a place to go. People Accused of Witchcraft, another website, and of all places, Cornell University has its own witchcraft collection online. Don't quite understand how Cornell got into it, but there you go. They've got a nice collection going up in Ithaca. Finally, on specific research on witches, there are, in fact, a few, actually a half a dozen or more family societies. If you are, you believe you're a descendant of, for example, Rebecca Nurse, well, there's a whole family society dedicated to her and her memory, and they have their own collections of research materials. about Rebecca Nurse and her family and her descendants. John Alden I put down here simply because I'm a Mayflower John Alden descendant. This is his son, John Alden Jr. He was accused of witchcraft in Salem. And there is a family society dedicated to John Alden Jr., the accused witch. He also escaped, by the way, from being imprisoned in Salem. But look up the family societies. Some of the other resources I've already cited to you list them all. Some are more obscure than others, and they are not all limited to Massachusetts. There are family societies for Connecticut, New Hampshire, New York, accused witches. The Boston Public Library has an amazing collection. You'll see in the web address there, they actually have a Salem Witch Trials site on the Boston Public Library website with lots and lots of links, also covering not just the accused witches, but their descendants and a lot of other resources. So a very excellent resource for you to research, particularly if you're looking at New England and more particularly if you're looking at Massachusetts. Cindy's list of all places, I was really pleasantly surprised that all places, Cindy's list has its own collection of witch research materials and its own set of links to lots of other interesting websites, Facebook pages, other social media, very broadly focused. And so, of course, it's free, as is the Boston Public Library. Really good sources of information about the accused, about other participants in the witch accusations, including the accusers, the judges, the clergy, and all of those people who were on my list earlier in this talk. Finally, a list of other historical and genealogical societies that in one form or another have resources related to witchcraft, witch accusations in New England and elsewhere. Some of them you'll know by name, the Winthrop Society, a lineage society. But some of the historical societies are quite interesting. I put at the bottom, and this is in no order of importance, I put at the bottom the Colonial Society of Massachusetts, Massachusetts. It has an amazing collection of research materials, which include the correspondence, going back to the clergy, the correspondence of Cotton Mather during the time period of the witch trials. And the quote I read to you about amen to God, we've just had 5 witches executed. Well, that comes from the collection that the Colonial Society of Massachusetts has, and it's quite interesting reading. It has the sermons of Samuel Parris on there that he gave during the witch trials, in which he touched upon witchcraft and the devil and so forth. And so they've done a marvelous job of transcribing a lot of old material and posting it onto their website. Again, it's free. It's not a lineage society in that sense that you have to be a member to access their material. All of these, the Essex Society of Genealogists, of course, Essex County was the hotbed for witch accusations. They've got their own collections of witch-related materials. And of course, last but not least, we have our mainstream resources, American Ancestors, which is of course subscription-based. Family Search 2, they have collections that will be relevant to your research on early American witches. I focused on Massachusetts here, but they have other collections, of course. And of course, the American Ancestors collections of periodicals, the Essex Genealogist and the Essex Antiquarian in particular, are rich sources of information about the witch accusations, the witch trials, the lineage of those people, and of course the New England Historical Genealogical Register, some of which I believe TMCC's library has. I don't know if it's a complete set. I think Suzanne could probably comment on that at the end of this talk. Let me just wrap it up here with a short list of books that I recommend. This happens to also track with the handout from this morning's email sent to you. These are focused on American witch trials. The published recommended readings also includes European witch trials, but on this list you see here, I would say, and I'm holding up in my hand, the most interesting book I read was Mary Beth Norton's In the Devil's Snare, a marvelous book available on Amazon and so forth. All of these books, though, and I have many of them, where you can find a nugget is going to the indexes and looking at who shows up in the index. An example, in Mary Beth Norton's book, when I went to the index, there were like 30 pages cited related to one of my ancestors involved in the witch trials. His name was Robert Pike. He wasn't an accused witch, nor was he an accuser. He was one of those commentators who was watching all of this and decided that this was just crazy. And he very publicly admonished the judges, the clergymen who were pushing these Salem witch trials, and vocally criticized the admission of what was called spectral evidence. Those of you who have dug in on the witch trials know what I mean. This is when somebody would testify, oh, I saw something in the sky. Oh, it was actually Mary Bradbury on a broomstick in the sky. Well, the judges in the Salem witch trials admitted that spectral evidence. So I've been able to do research by just looking at the indexes of some of these books. I look up what did Robert Pike do according to this book and so forth. So these are rich resources as well. I don't know which of these TMCC has on their bookshelves, but they're all excellent books. The other person I would recommend is Marilyn Roach. You see 2 books that she published here. She's probably one of the leading authorities in the land on the witch trials, not just Salem. She is a consultant to the Salem Witch Museum, and she is the person who is principally responsible for those descendants packets that I described earlier. If she's not the sole author, she is the principal author of those descendants packets, knows where all the bones are buried, so to speak, and has all the citations to source documents in her books and in her descendants packets. So with that, Suzanne, let's take questions.
Great. I was just going through those list of books, trying to put into the chat box as many as I could look up while you were talking. We do have Mary Norton's book, In the Devil's Snare, and we also have A Storm of Witchcraft, and that A Storm of Witchcraft by Emerson Baker. That's also available online in ebook form through our library. So it'll take me a while to look up all of those, but if there's one in particular that anyone's interested in checking out, either in ebook form or paper form, that lives here locally in the Northern Nevada area, please go ahead and put it in the chat box, and I'll look it up for you right now. Okay. DLB put in the chat box, what claims were made to support the witch accusations? What were those women supposed to have done to make them a witch?
Well, if I had another hour, I could give a thorough answer to that question. It was anything and everything. Examples. My cow fell over after so-and-so walked by my house. I came down with a fever when so-and-so came to my door one day. It was, from the sublime to the ridiculous. There were accusations more serious of child abuse, of individuals killing their children in a couple of cases. And some of the accusations went back 30 years. So several of the Salem witches, somebody remembered that 10 years ago, so-and-so looked at me cross-eyed and my crops died. Well, that was trotted out 10 years later in the Salem witch trials as evidence that this person should be convicted of witchcraft 10 years later. So as I say, it was kind of anything and everything. And of course, fast forward today, this is why virtually every single person ever accused and convicted has been exonerated, because it was preposterous. These were all, fictitious allegations. Much has been said about the young girls who were the accusers, the principal accusers in Salem, and having fits and rolling their eyes and rolling on the floors and so forth during the trials. And even more evidence of witchcraft was if the accused person walked into the courtroom, the girls would fall on the floor. Well, that was evidence that this person was possessed of the devil. Were the girls making it all up? Well, certainly there's a large number of historians who have tried to psychoanalyze these girls. Were they crazy? Were they suffering from mental disorders? Were they just lying for fun because they were young teenagers who were bored? Who knows? That's never been definitively proven. Only one of those young girls ever said she was sorry thereafter. The rest of them, they've gone down in history as the main protagonists in the Salem witch trials with no recourse ever against them. Not sure if I answered the question.
No, I think you did. Let's see here. I'm looking. Let's see here. George says in the chat box, I read the book The Witches, Salem, 1692 by Stacy Schiff a few years ago, but he thought it wasn't as engaging as he was expecting.
Yeah, that's a very interesting comment, because when I started working with Rachel Christone at the Salem Witch Museum, and I looked at her recommended readings, Stacy Schiff's book is not on there. And I asked her about that. I said, well, this is a very popular book. A lot of people have bought it and so forth. Why isn't it on there? And she said, well, we concluded that her research was not reliable, and we didn't want to recommend her book. So there you go. I've read that book. It was, very kind of user-friendly, I guess I would say, but there are much better books, and at least according to Salem Witch Museum, more accurate books that you might want to read.
Tracy put in the chat box, my step-great-grandfather's ancestor, Mary Perkins Bradbury, was a Salem witch. Her husband, Thomas, broke her out of jail and she survived. I was so disappointed I wasn't a direct descendant of hers when I discovered my great-grandfather was not my bio great-grandfather.
Well, of course, that's who I was using as my case study in this presentation, was Mary Perkins Bradbury, my ancestor, direct ancestor. And, it's interesting. Thomas Bradbury, a prominent fellow, has served as my gateway ancestor to a number of European lineage societies. Kings and queens and so forth came down to me through Thomas and Mary Bradbury. So go figure. And I can't say for certain what you read, Suzanne, was that Thomas sprung her. It's not clear who did it and how she got out. So that's still a mystery as we speak. How did Mary Perkins Bradbury avoid the hangman's noose? We just don't know.
Marlene put it into the chat box. She's not a descendant, but it's her understanding that one of the witches was a Van Horn. Do you know anything about the Van Horn witch?
Personally, I don't. I could certainly look it up, Marilyn, if you give me a little bit more information about what you believe your connection is. And I could do what I just was describing, go look up in the indexes of the books behind me on my shelf and see if a Van Horn shows up there. So send me an email afterwards, please.
And George commented that he doesn't have any New England ancestors, but he has been to Salem a couple of times and went to the Salem Witch Museum. He thinks it was in 2001, so that sounds like it would be, kind of interesting to go to. Let's see here.
Let me say one thing, Suzanne, about that.
Uh-huh.
So every Halloween, I started this talk saying it's a deadly serious topic. And the town of Salem years ago, one of the reasons they did that 400th anniversary commemoration in 1992 was, they realized that this was a very serious, somber anniversary. And every year since then, they go up to, I forget what it's called, Gallows Hill, where all of these victims were hanged by the neck. And they have a moment of silence for each of those 20 people. In the midst of, the Halloween celebrations and so forth, they're there paying tribute and commemorating these people who were victimized. So that one of these days I want to be there to witness that. I think that would be a very moving occasion.
Karen wrote in the chat box, my ancestor was Sarah Town Bridges Cloyce.
Don't know her.
Don't know her, okay.
What's the last name?
Spelled C-L-O-Y-E-S.
C as in cat?
Yeah, C as in cat, L like love.
Yeah, that's fine.
Well, guess what? In the handout from the Associated Daughters of Early American Witches, there on page 2, there she is. Sarah Town Bridges Cloyes, Massachusetts, married Edmund Bridges, first husband, and the second husband was Peter Cloyes. So there you go.
And Jeannie says that she has 3 great, it looks like, I assume that means grandparents, Samuel and Sarah Wardwell, and Elizabeth Clausen.
Elizabeth is right there above Sarah Cloyes. Elizabeth Clausen from Connecticut, married Stephen Clausen. And what was the other one, Suzanne?
Sarah Wardwell, W-A-R-D-W-E-L-L.
I'm looking her up. Isn't this fun? Sarah Wardwell is right there. Sarah Hooper Hawks Wardwell from Massachusetts, married first Adam Hawks, married second Samuel Wardwell. So again, if you go to the website of the Associated Daughters of Early American Witches, you may find more information about those 2 ancestors of yours.
Barb put down that her 9th grandmother was Mary Esty, E-S-T-Y, Esty.
Well, that's a big name in the Salem witch trials. And she is one of the women who is there commemorated at the Salem witch trials memorial in stone. So that would be, she was married to Isaac Esty, according to the Associated Daughters of Early American Witches, but yeah, her trial was a travesty.
Belinda says, my Quaker great-great-grandfather served on the jury of the only Pennsylvania witch trial, and she was found innocent.
It's interesting. I heard you say that before we started the recording. Most of the witch trials I've been exposed to, they didn't have juries. It was these judges who were completely biased and completely persuaded by the local pastors or the Cotton Mathers that guilty if not proven innocent, basically. And so it was rare to have jurors and juries.
In that line, Lori put down, one of my ancestors was an attorney that defended witches. I was not researching that line when I stumbled on it, so I didn't investigate it at the time.
Yeah. And what I don't know is whether some of these societies admit members who weren't actually accused or accusers or even accusers. I know son of a witch is just male descendants of accused witches, not the judges or the priests or any of that stuff, but I'm just not sure what they do with the other kinds of participants.
Okay, Lori says, I have an ancestor on the list, but he was born and died in England.
Right. So in the handout from the recommended readings, there's a group of books that are about the European witch trials. One is the Oxford Illustrated History of Witchcraft, Oxford as in England. I'm looking to see if any of them are specific to England. At least the titles don't indicate that, but some are, broadly worded as the European witch hunt, early modern Europe, etc. So there's a chance that your English ancestor would be found in one of these 7 books recommended by the Salem Witch Museum.
Okay, Karen wrote down, this is kind of interesting. She says, the book by Daniel Gagnon about Rebecca Nurse is my ancestor. She was the sister of Rebecca Nurse and Mary Easty, E-A-S-T-Y. I'm not sure if that's spelled correct. Sarah Town Coyos was the sister of Rebecca Nurse and Mary Esty, E-A-S-T-Y.
Yes, and Rebecca was one of the most famous of the Salem accused. She was tried, convicted, and hung. And as I mentioned earlier, there's a family society dedicated to her. When we held the luncheon back in August, where Rachel Christone spoke, we had 3 people in the audience who were also descendants of Rebecca Nurse. It was really kind of amazing.
Jay, you talked about your Bradbury line. By any chance, is Mary Bradbury's line related to the famous author Ray Bradbury?
Yes.
Oh my goodness, he's my favorite science fiction writer.
Yes, he is a descendant.
Wow, what a small world. Okay, let's see here. That's all the questions in the chat box. I'm going to open it up to the class. If you'd like to open your microphone, but please leave your camera off because we are recording. If you have any questions for Jay, go ahead and ask him directly at this time.
This is DLB. I don't have a question, but I do have a follow-up on the comment of, about the Pennsylvania trial. And apparently that was by jury. It's there's a whole article out on the website about it. And they actually had to call a grand jury and then I don't know, a smaller jury, whatever it was called. I kind of was reading through it as we were talking.
What year was that trial?
It was 7 years before the Salem witch trials.
Okay, well that's early, and that's interesting to me because that was not the norm, at least in Massachusetts. I can't speak to the Connecticut trials because I don't have a Connecticut witch ancestor to have caused me to dive into that, but at least the Massachusetts example, very different from what you've described in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, this was right. It was Pennsylvania. It's kind of interesting to read through it, and so yeah, look it up if you get a chance.
Yeah, I mean, what's most interesting to me? I'm a retired lawyer, and I used to defend people in court, and so to me, what is most provocative is how were these trials conducted as far as the evidence was concerned? I mentioned spectral evidence, and that was a hugely controversial thing. There were actually, manuals coming out of England for how to conduct witch trials. And the people in Massachusetts, read the books and so forth. None of them said you can rely on spectral evidence, but they went ahead and did that. And the judges allowed that kind of evidence to come in. It would be interesting by way of comparison. What did the judge in your Pennsylvania case allow as evidence? Or was anybody attempting to use spectral evidence? Were they pointing at the ceiling of the place where the trial was being conducted and saying, oh, there's the devil up there in the ceiling? That's what happened in Salem. And so judge or jury, when you let that kind of evidence in, you've got a travesty of justice.
Jay, Tracy put into the chat box pettit jury. Tracy, did you want to unmute your microphone? Are you referring to the Pennsylvania case?
She
She wanted to know what there was a grand jury. It was the petty jury is the second, the trial jury.
Pettit being French for small. So you got your
Yeah.
big jury and your little jury.
and that's what I said. It was a smaller jury, but I couldn't remember the name of it.
Yeah, I know. That's why I typed it in, and
good.
I call it petty jury because that's why we said it in Louisiana.
Well, Louisiana was kind of French.
It was very French.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean the attorneys still have to take French because so many of the laws are in French in Louisiana. It's really interesting.
And I could swear that Louisiana still has remnants of the Napoleonic Code.
Oh, totally. Absolutely. It's like another country.
Right.
Great questions. Anybody else got a question for Jay?
I do have a question. Can you speak a little bit about Cotton Mather?
Well, sure. He was one of the most prominent theologians of his time. He wrote prodigiously on anything and everything. He was, if you go on auction houses today trying to buy any of his original works, they can cost you $100,000. He was very prominent and a very important influencer. I guess today you'd say if you were on Twitter, you're an influencer. Well, he was an influencer way back when. And one of the interesting things about Mary Beth Norton's book is how she talks about the macro trends that surrounded things like the Salem witch trials, one of which was the Indian Wars that were taking place all around that area. And people like Cotton Mather would emphasize both in their sermons and in their writings that all of the Indian attacks were, of course, the work of the devil. And they carried over this view into the witch trials, that witchcraft, the threat of the devil, was in the air, and you would wake up in the morning and you would really think that the devil was afoot. And it was the likes of Cotton Mather in his sermons that fueled that kind of worldview that permeated these witch trials.
Great questions. Anybody else?
By the way, Cotton Mather, I want to say was in late 1692. One of the reasons this all stopped in Salem was there was so much pushback from the communities about things like spectral evidence that Cotton Mather took a second look at all of this. And ultimately, his powers of persuasion came to bear on the governor of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, who said, you got to put a stop to this. And so he was useful. I don't want to say he was the cause, but he did finally sing a different song and persuaded that the governor that the trials should be suspended. Footnote, it was also when the governor's wife was accused of witchcraft. I think that might have had something to do with it.
An interesting footnote in history. Okay, anybody else have questions? Give it a few seconds, Jay.
Yeah, and I do encourage people, if you want to dive in more on your research, look for the slide deck that will be circulated after we're done today. Look at the websites I've noted. This is not even half of the potential material that's out there, but in the interest of time and efficiency, these are kind of the highlights. I'll call it a highlights reel.
Okay, great. Well, it doesn't look like there's any more questions. So what I'll do, Jonathan, is I'll say thank you very, very much for such yet another outstanding guest presentation that you've
Very welcome.
given your time to.